meetings. I'm switching my mind from land and demand and law to biblical manhood and womanhood. But I'm also aware this is our last session, at least as far as this Zoom series is concerned. And so we're going to move quite fast to sort of wrap it up. And like I've been saying, I'll just be sort of touching the surface of this because it's an introductory session. We're just sort of introducing it to the whole concept of biblical manhood and womanhood, and encouraging you very strongly to plan to come for the actual training where we're able to get into the depth of all the different things that we're talking about. So just for clarity's sake, what time are we ending so that I can figure out what to touch and what to just sort of brush over? Are we ending at 8:30? Moses?
Yes, we are to end at 8:30, but we can have maybe 10 or 15 more minutes, depending on the questions that will come in.
Okay, I'll aim for 8:30. And so I'll just take maybe the next 4 minutes to hear from us about what we've got so far, with particular emphasis on our last session, so I can see if we remember where we've reached so far and what we had covered, and then we can sort of pick it up from there and see how we can wrap it up. The floor is yours. Those who were here last session, what did we cover? As I prepare to share my screen, if I can be given permission to.
You can share your screen when you want to.
Right. In the meantime, one or two people, those whose hands have been up, that they've attended those sessions, or those who just at least attended the last one, what did we cover in that particular session?
Back in the chat says we went through the creation story. Just to add on that, from the creation story, we picked on things that responsibilities we had been given according to the creation story. Things that man was supposed to, we as man was supposed to do.
What were those things? Does anyone remember? Like Moses said, I'm very happy to sit and listen to everyone breathing.
In the charts, we have to rule and to rule or have dominion. That was one.
We have 1 more minute for this before we start powering ahead. Is there anything else other than us ruling and having dominion? Was that for man or for both man and woman?
I believe it was for man and woman, for both.
Yeah, and I see Becky ruling is actually stewarding and not lording it over. Hosanna to Juna is saying a woman being a helper. Awesome. Right. So I'm going to sort of power ahead for this, and then I'll pause for a little bit for us to sort of chip in. And I really hope you guys will find time to either organize for an in-person session on BMW or to come out to camp for us to go through all this, because it's very fundamental for how we grow as Christians, how we grow as believers, because everything you are in life is based on the foundation of you as a man or you as a woman. Before you're a pastor, before you're an architect or a doctor or a mother or a father or a brother, sister, president, at your core, at your foundation is your definition, like we talked about earlier, what it means to be a man and a woman. And a lot of times you will fail or rise based on what that definition is. And so sort of the summary of these, what we'll call the pillars of biblical manhood and womanhood. If you're looking at the screen that I'm sharing, you have the two top ones up there. This is not in order of importance. Is we are called to relationship and we are called to be image bearers. And we saw the reference for that in Genesis. And we talked a little bit about, how when God creates man and woman, the first difference we notice is he does not speak them into being. He actually speaks to himself. For everything else that he creates, he speaks to the sea to produce all the fish. He speaks to the sky concerning, the birds of the air. He speaks to the earth to produce vegetation and living things and all of these others. But when it comes to creating man, is when we see a relationship for the first time. He speaks to himself and he says, "Let us make man." And more to the relationship thing is when he finally decides to make man or to make mankind, he gets intimately involved. He sits down, stands up. I'm not sure what he was doing, but he gets hold of the ground and he molds and he creates. It's personal, it's intimate, it portrays relationship as he crafts and molds and makes man. It was the same thing even with woman, when he takes from Adam's side and goes aside and creates this woman. More to relationship is that I asked the question about what was the first thing that Adam saw when he was created. And we discovered it was not woman, it wasn't even the world, but it was God as the first thing that he saw when he was created and then given an assignment. And it's the same thing with the woman. God had a relationship with the woman before he ever brought her to the man. He actually made sure the man was asleep so that he could have time with the woman. And when he was done with the woman, he then brought her to Adam was able to. When it comes to image bearer, that's even more explicitly mentioned when he says, "Let us make man in our own image." And that's what we are called to be bearing the image of God wherever we go and in whatever we do. And then after that, it gets a little bit more definite for the different genders. And I've been very stereotypical and put the attributes for men in blue and those for ladies in pink. So I'd like to ask us a couple. Do we see God talking about headship or leadership to man, especially in the book of Genesis?
I beg your pardon?
Headship, when we talk about headship and stewardship for man, where do we see that brought out? In the book of Genesis or in the Genesis chapter 1 and 2. And the reason I'm asking is from the previous lessons we did before, I said I don't want you to be taking what I say. I want you to be able to see it yourself from the word of God, which we've all agreed is going to be our standard rather than our experiences or a certain man of God or anything like that. So if I say men are created for headship and stewardship, do we see that portrayed anywhere or explicitly said anywhere in Genesis 1 and 2? actually quite easy. Rebecca says she can think of stewardship, Genesis 2:15. And that Genesis 2:15, I think, says, then the Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend it and to keep it. That's correct. He's placed in the garden to tend it. But also when you go a little further back, when he says, let us make man in our own image, what does he then say with the rest of that statement? And I can help us read that if necessary, but I'm hoping you guys will find some of those yourselves, because trying to avoid spoon feeding that I might have to in the interests of time. Anyone there?
Can I speak, please?
Mm-hmm. You can speak, please, if that's
Okay.
what you said.
Okay. I think for me, one of the things that stood out when I was reading those two chapters was every time God was communicating, he actually spoke to the man. Even when they messed up, he went to the man, not the woman. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I think for me that was leadership of some sort to me. It spoke out leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fact that God was always talking to the man, yeah. At no point does it say, and God told Eve, or, yeah.
Okay. So he actually does speak to Eve, but that was after he had confronted Adam. That's after the fall, where he comes to Adam and he asks, where are you, and all of these things. And then when Adam answers and says, the woman you gave me, that's when Eve has to also give her answer. But your point is clear there, because the instructions concerning the Garden of Eden and all of these things were given to Adam. But the very first encounter we have of it is in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, where it says, let's make man in our image, in our likeness, so he may rule over the fish in the sea, the birds of the sky, over the livestock. And then later, in chapter 2, is when he creates Adam and he puts him in the garden and he gives him the instructions. And so when things go sideways, he comes to Adam and he asks for an account. It's actually very interesting. What a lot of people don't realize is that Adam disobeyed. That was his sin. Adam disobeyed. Eve, on the other hand, was deceived. This is because Adam received the instructions directly from God, whereas Eve was not present when that happened. So it becomes important for us to understand all of those differences in the responsibilities that we are given. And the other thing that I like to talk about with leadership or headship, I like to use the Luganda word, which is obunanyizibwa, which directly translated means person who gets blamed, the person who takes the responsibility for what is happening. And so headship in this case means that the responsibility, the instructions, the direction was given to Adam. Both of them had a relationship with God. On the aspect of stewardship, again, both were given stewardship, but instructions were given to Adam and he was told to tend and to keep. Now, if we had a lot more time, we'd go a lot deeper into all of these different attributes. But I'm looking at the clock and trying to move us ahead because I want us to cover what these things mean and then also cover what they have turned out to be as a result of the fall and what we can do about them. I want to shift gears a little bit to the ladies, to the pink. You have that word there, Eza Neged. I don't know if we'd had a chance to talk a bit about what that means, but Eza Neged basically is the original term for suitable helper. Eza means helper, Neged means suitable or comparable to. Those are the two phrases that are used. You're either comparable to or you are suitable. And what that means by Ezer is a lot of times when we use the word helper, in our minds, we automatically go to assistant or second in command or less than. You're thinking helper, you're thinking house girl, you're thinking second best or something along those lines. And that is definitely not what is being referred to here when they say Ezer. Ezer is used in the Bible in reference to the woman, but it's also used in the Bible in reference to God himself. God refers to himself as a helper. God refers to himself as both in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament. When David's talking about, I look to the hills, where does my help come from? This is in reference to God. God being the helper and not the assistant. We also look at it in the New Testament where he says that I will not leave you desolate, I will not leave you alone, but I will leave you a helper. I will send you a helper, I will send you a comforter. And this is in reference to the Holy Spirit. I don't think any of us think of the Holy Spirit as second to us or beneath us. Instead, he's the person that comes in to help us. The other word that's sometimes used when we reference to helper is a very complicated English word called, not even confident enough to pronounce it. It's called succor or succor, S-U-C-C-O-R, which is basically a refuge, a place that you run to. And all this is being said in reference to the woman as the Ezer. Neged means comparable to or opposite. And in this case, the best example I can use is the example of a ladder. Those of you who've seen those ladders that where you have a two-way ladder that's shaped like an A. I wish I had an image that I would have prepared to show, almost like a triangle. And one part leans on the other. And they push against each other. But in pushing against each other, they are able to provide stability. And this is what we are talking about when we are talking about an Ezer, a suitable helper. You're there to help, but you are not the same. And this is where a lot of people get it confused, especially with the feminist movement, who are very stuck on roles, because roles for them equate value. Your role is more valuable, or this, I'm going to fight for this role because roles signify value. And what the Bible is saying is that the two are not the same. They are of equal value, but they have different attributes that they are bringing to the table that sometimes are opposite to each other in order to support each other, as opposed to in order to compete. It's about complementing and not competing. And as you complement and as you help, another misconception we have is that women are there to help men do what men are supposed to do. And that's just part of the story. The woman's role is to help bring about the complete image of who Christ is, because Christ, or God, has both male and female attributes. And yet when he was creating us in his image, he did not create us as some hybrid mix that's neither male nor female, because God is neither male nor female. He created with those differences so that each party needs the other in order to fully bring out what the image of this God is. And if one of us could have the whole complete image of God residing within us, then it would be God, really. And we can delve deeper into that when we have time to go into all the details of what it means to be an image bearer. So Ezer Neged is referring to the woman as the suitable helper. God creates man, gives him an assignment, puts him in the garden, puts him in charge of all of these things. And then for the first time in that entire narrative, we hear God say something that he's not been saying before. He's been saying he created this and it was good. He created that, it was good. He created the other, it was good. When he gets here, he says it is not good for man to be alone. And that's the most favorite scripture for us to love to quote when we are referring to weddings and marriage. Oh, it's not good for man to be alone, therefore he must find a wife. But that's not what this is in reference to. It's not necessarily about you being a wife. It's about you being able to bring out the full image of God and to be able to help with the fulfillment, the assignment of stewardship, which was given to both man and woman right from the beginning. I'd like to switch gears and talk a little bit about life giver. What do we understand when we hear the term life giver? I'd like to hear from you guys.
In the chat we have Becky says a womb man.
Wow,
A
I
womb.
see what you did.
Yeah.
Man with a womb.
And not a man with a womb, a womb man.
Okay.
And then can bear children.
And again, this is why I wish we were having the actual session where we can interact. So here's a question I would throw, and this is actually part of the worldview a lot of us have. Does that mean that if a woman cannot bear children, she is not fully the woman God created her to be? Or if she chooses not to bear children?
Can I answer that? I wrote it.
Sure.
Oh, okay. With can bear children, it's mainly the gender as a woman. They can. When there are some anomalies, those who can't or those who may not choose to, it does not take away the whole big picture of them being able to. It still keeps them in that. It's, how should I put it, an anomaly, either by choice or by God saying you will not be able to.
Okay. I see Hosanna Tujuna has a hand raised.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes, I was going to say in life giving, I understand it best as nurturing. It doesn't just stop at you giving birth or bringing something into existence. You have to look after that thing, just like a plant. When you sow a seed and God waters it, He's nurturing the seed. So it's more of nurturing to me because it gives much more sense than just giving birth. Although giving birth is also essential. Yes.
True. And that's why you notice what we're putting as a pillar is not giving birth. It is being a giver of life. And I can give you some very silly examples. Every man on this chat knows, for example, that if you're doing your workout in public and you're doing your 20 push-ups and you reached push-up number 19 and you feel you're about to die, you have nothing more to give, and a woman walks past, some life is injected into you from God knows where, and you'll churn out an additional 5 push-ups for no good reason other than the lady went by and injected life into your weary bones. I have no specific control over that, but it's just the way God has wired them. Now that's a silly example, but I'm talking about it I can give so many other examples that have nothing to do with giving birth to children. They have everything to do with the atmosphere that a woman brings into a place with an anointing that she carries upon her person. Whether it is in terms of spaces, you can go to another example I like to give is if you see most of these guys when they've just moved out of their parents' homes and the houses or the boards that they are living in, a guy would be very comfortable to just put, a mattress on the floor and have his subwoofer somewhere in a corner and a TV and one of those plastic dish holder things with a couple of plates. And this is a very happy man. He's not living like that because he's broke, but it's just because the way he's wired and his simplicity just rolls like that. But let a woman walk into that space or walk into that young man's life, and things start to change. Life, that place starts to look like it has been lived in. We have all these sayings that a man can build a house, but it's a lady who will make it a home. And a home is a place where there is life. I also give examples of when out here at camp, we live in a very beautiful, natural location, and it had been that way for almost 13, 12 years until I remember when I started insisting on having a lot more women in leadership here and in certain departments, and then suddenly flowers started appearing in all these gardens that before just had strange green grass and things like that. And the place just became alive and full of things in a completely different way of adding color, of adding beauty, of adding basically life and art. And I can't find a word to describe it, but those vibe, those a beauty, those a wholeness, those a completeness that women bring into the environment that they walk into, sometimes even without trying. And here's a funny thing that I want, again, we don't have time to go into all of this. When we say woman's a life giver, it's in reference to two things. One, obviously, the one that comes to everyone's minds is giving birth. Men, however much they want to, in however much of God's image they are, cannot give birth. They do not have a womb. They do not have the relevant apparatus that was wired specifically and put into the woman. But also, on the other hand, something I want to throw there that we'll unpack when you guys finally come, but for you to think about is who gave the woman that title of life giver. And you'll notice God gave Adam a name. God gave everything on the earth a name except the animals and living creatures, where he told Adam to name them. So Adam names all the living creatures, okay? And whatever he named them is what God went with. Now you'll notice that the order that happens in, God says it's not good for man to be alone. And as soon as he says that, one would expect that he would then create Eve and present her to Adam, but that's not what he does. The order of it is, he says it's not good for man to be alone. And then he gives man an assignment to name all the animals. And he brings them to him, and Adam names them, but for him, no suitable helper was found. Then he puts him to sleep and brings Eve. There's a reason behind that we don't have time to get into, but I'm just putting that out there for you guys to be thinking about and reading and researching about. And then the second thing is, when God creates Eve, brings her to Adam, and Adam names her woman. He then later, first he calls her woman because she was taken out of man. Later, after the fall, after they've all been given their allotted punishments and consequences, then Adam names her Eve. That's when she gets her name, and he calls her Eve, the mother of the living. That point right after the fall. And I want you to take time and correlate him choosing to give her that name in relation to the punishment or the consequence that had been given to her by God and what he was trying to do with that. And again, I'm looking at the clock, looking at how much time we have. So I want us to quickly jump to one thing. All of these are well and good and they sound great. This is what God has called us to be, this is what biblical manhood and womanhood is about. But the truth is, when we look around us in our day-to-day lives, this is not what is happening. Instead, what is happening is there's a perversion of each of these things. So we just ended with life giver, how women bring life into the world and do all of these things. The perversion of that is, what do you think happens when a woman's not being a life giver? What's the perversion of that? I gave the example of how a lady can walk into a room, these guys begin to do all these push-ups much more than they would have done. A lady who's not living in her purpose or in the identity that God has created her to do can do the complete opposite. And that's why you find Solomon writing in Proverbs lots and lots of times, almost like we hadn't got the point when he said it the first time, about what it's like to be with a nagging wife. And he talks about it very specifically. I remember one particular part where he says it is better to spend a night in the corner of a roof than to be in an entire mansion with a nagging wife. And I remember reading that when I was young and thinking that's very specific. Seems like he had had a very eventful night, because it was very, very particular. In the corner of a roof. It's like he woke up that morning in the corner of that roof and was like, you know what, that was actually a good night in comparison to being in my entire palace with a nagging wife. There's also a common saying around, especially the Western culture, but even here in Uganda, most of us know that if your dad is not happy, then he's not happy. But if your mom's not happy, nobody in that house is going to be happy. They have the ability to either give life or they have the ability to take it. Every war that has ever existed on this planet has a woman behind it, because she has the ability to influence, to change things, and can either unleash life or can unleash death. For men, they will be the tool that is being used, but the person manipulating things in the back will end up being the woman. That is what brings us even to Ezeneged, suitable helper. The perversion of that becomes either you're helping turn things the wrong way or you are in competition. And that's as a result of the fall, where the instinct of a woman is to, that's why the Bible talks about her desire will be for a husband. And that's more in a competitive sort of setting where you're at loggerheads, not to compliment, but to push back. And that's where submission becomes a very difficult thing. And yet submission is also part of the image of God, because Christ shows submission. There is submission within, and again, I'm really rushing through all of these things. So I'm just going to give us the top notes and then leave more time for us to ask questions and have discussion, because we can't cover everything. Submission becomes a trick when there's a perversion of being a suitable helper. And yet by being submissive, you are portraying the image of God, because surprise, surprise, God also is submissive. That's how that works. When it comes to the men, the perversion of stewardship, instead of looking after things for the Creator, you are exploiting those things for yourself. And that covers everything from the environment to our relationships, to our workplaces, you know, the whole capitalism thing, where instead of looking after what is around us so that we can be good stewards of it and be able to present it back to God, for Him to say, well done, good and faithful servant, you're looking at it and thinking, how can I get as much as I can out of this thing? How can I milk every little grain out of it for my maximum benefit, and not in a way that actually benefits the thing that you've been put in charge of? And that even goes for our relationships with each other. Men can be very much of users to benefit themselves because they're thinking only about themselves and abusing that position and that role. And it ties in very well into headship, where instead of being the head as the person who's responsible, you are the head as the boss, and you are lording it over everyone. That's why when the fall comes, the punishment that's allotted, for lack of a better word, is it says to the woman, your desire will be for him, but he will rule over you. So there's that conflict that begins to come as a result of the fall. When it comes to image bearing, I think we talked a little bit about that, how the devil cannot fight God, but he can tarnish his image. He can fight what looks like God in order to change the way it looks and cause problems. So when people look at me and you, who are his image bearers, who are supposed to be living like him, it convolutes that image and affects the way people view God. But that doesn't just apply to fellow people, it applies to all of creation. The Bible talks about how all of creation awaits in eager anticipation for the sons of God to be made manifest, for us to actually begin to steward all of creation the way God put us there to do it. But we as his image bearers, instead causing creation to groan and wait for the act creation to rule over it made manifest. And then, of course, the last and most important is relationship. I usually like to tell people that Adam and Eve were not kicked out of the garden because of sin. They were kicked out of the garden because they were not supposed to reach out and get a hold of the fruit to eat from the tree of eternal life. But the thing that happened when sin comes into the picture is sin damages relationship. Sin messes with your relationship with God. That's why Christ comes back to restore us back to relationship. Whereas in the beginning in the Garden of Eden, where Eden, by the way, refers to presence of God, sin came in and removed us from that presence. Sin comes in and damages the relationship. Sin comes in and causes us to hide from God. That messes the relationship. So every one of these pillars has an element where it gets perverted or convoluted as a result of sin. And that is what we're struggling with. And that's what Christ came back to do. And so I'm going to skip ahead a couple of slides because we only have 3 minutes left. And we're going to have some time to list some of these perversions, but I want to give that to you as an assignment. For each of these pillars, relationships, image bearing, I want you to sit down and think, how are you doing in that area and where are the struggles? How has it been perverted in your life? Your relationship with God or your relationship with people? We are born for relationship. I'm supposed to be in relationship with my brothers. How is that being perverted? I'm supposed to be in relationship with my sisters. How is that being perverted? I'm supposed to be an image bearer. How am I doing in that department? For the men, this one's for you, headship and stewardship. And for the women, how am I being an elder, or how am I being a life giver, or how is that being perverted? And then just this last slide is a couple of pointers I wanted to just use to drive the point home before I open it up to questions. Who you are is more important than what you do. And this sounds a bit strange because a lot of us have grown up with a lot of emphasis on what we are supposed to do, because we believe that what we do is what defines us. But who you are is more important, because if I was to ask some of you, so who are you? I asked Moses, so I asked Rebecca, or I asked Gloria, or any of the other names I see here. You will notice that a lot of times your instinct is to answer that question with what you do. I was hearing myself being introduced, and a lot of what was being talked about was what I do and not necessarily who I am. That is our standard sort of mindset. If you ask, oh, who's this guy? Oh, he is a doctor. That's what he does. It's not who he is. God might not know the doctor. He knows the person and who he called you to do. And so as we talk about BMW, we're not calling you guys to do certain things. That's why a lot of this conversation has not been about the stereotypical, you're supposed to be a provider. Men are providers, men are protectors, men are priests, men are kings. All those are things you do that are an outflow of who you actually are. So we're not giving you a list of new things to do. We are calling you to be these things that God has called you to do. And that's one of the principal differences, especially with the parable of the prodigal son, where one son was working so hard to please his in order to earn a position, whereas the other one was running around doing all sorts of manyanga. But he was still a son, enjoying all the benefits when he came back. One had a mindset of a servant, one had a mindset of a son. We are calling you to have relationship. We are calling you to understand your identity. Because once you understand who you are, it affects all those other things. Who you are is you'll carry whoever you are into your careers, into your relationships, into your ministries, into anything else you get in, will be carried into any one of those spaces. And it's important for you to understand this as we talk about biblical manhood and womanhood. I'll close with an illustration. something I read somewhere, I think it was online or I heard someone talking about it, that they say that the only person that can wake up a king, you go and fetch them a glass of water and the king gets up and does that, is a child of that king. To allow ourselves to be these children and spend so much time trying to work hard and do all these things so we can get into a certain position of hierarchy. Want to be the prime minister, want to be the head of worship, want to be the pastor, want to be the CEO, want to be all these things that we do, and we forget who we are, and we are children. And being a child affords you way more privilege, way more access, way more relationship. So it becomes important for us to safeguard this thing, this being a child of God. It's not a position, it is an identity. And that's what God is calling us to be. And this is something that we should constantly be evaluating, constantly be looking out for, so that we can grow in that, we can remember who we're created to be, and then everything else we do becomes an outflow, whether I be a protector, whether I become a father, whether I become a wife, whether I become whatever I will be, flowing out of who I am, the person, man and woman that God created me to be. God did not create Eve and make her have children and then she became a woman. He brought her as she was, with or without children. He brought her before she was a wife. He brought her before she was all these other things, these titles that we aspire to. She was already complete and finished in Christ as a woman, as an image bearer, as someone born out of relationship, as a suitable helper, as a life giver, and was brought to Adam. Called to be a steward, was given headship, was given relationship, all of these other attributes. Fully complete as man and created in God's image. I would like to wrap up there. It's been a very rushed session, but I would want to allocate the remaining 10 minutes for any questions or quarrels. Someone who has an interpretive dance just helps stir me to know where to put a little bit more clarity or emphasis. We find time and come for a weekend where we can actually delve into these in a bit more detail.
Okay, thank you very much, Enoch, for sharing with us for these 4 sessions. The chat is open in case you have a question. You can also raise your hand, a digital hand, and you can be given a chance to ask your question. You won't have to write it. But if you have any questions, you can also put them in the chat. We are going to have just a few minutes in which we will have our questions answered. In the chat, I see some thanks coming through from Ruth Allison. Okay.
Thank you, Ed. It was so lovely to hear the things you've mentioned. But I just caught up with the last part. It's found in who we are and just knowing that I'm a child. And I just wanted to ask kindly that you elaborate on just that, the fact that knowing who I am and that I'm a child of God, because sometimes, so many times, even when you approach the Lord in prayer on what I may not know how to speak to him in a way. It's just father-daughter relationship. Sometimes because of circumstances, the things we've gone through. And I'll give an example. When I wanted to do certain things, sometimes I felt like, Lord, why isn't this working out? Why isn't that working out? But maybe I did not posture myself in a way that a child approaches a father. So I just wanted just for you to elaborate that part, but also to clarify how a child relates in terms of father relationship. Thank you.
An interesting question, and it's a struggle that a lot of people actually do have. You're in very good company, and that's because of the attack the enemy has had on the whole image bearing thing. So even our relationships with our earthly fathers begin to shape the way we think of approaching God, who's our heavenly. I wish I could give you, the 12 keys to approaching God as a child, or the 7 principles, or any of those things. But the thing that comes to mind immediately is when Christ rebukes his disciples and tells them, "Let the little children come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." And the honest truth is, if you think about the come, they really have no formula. They come as they are. You've seen even with our current president, whether you like him or not, there'll be security, there'll be all these things, and this random kid will just, no protocol observed, and just start pulling at his trousers and trying to understand what exactly is this material made of. And the consolation and comfort that God is actually desiring that kind of relationship with you is insane. So what I would say to you is, it's not the disciples or the people around you to tell you the correct protocols of coming to God as a child. It's for you to just come, and then he will teach you. You look at Christ teaching his disciples to pray, and it's like the most basic prayer. There was no Sheri Baba and Ramama. There is no, start with thanksgiving, then segue into appreciation, then, tear down gates and uphold principle. It is a very basic, simple prayer of come as you are and speak. Speaking nonsense, it's fine. You already knew the nonsense. If you're speaking wisdom, you'll discover that your wisdom is foolishness. You're coming before a holy God. What I would encourage you is, for now, as you begin to grow this relationship, ignore the protocol and come before God as honestly and as sincerely and as vulnerably as possible. And allow him to be the one to begin to instruct you in the way that you're going to have relationship with him. The other funny thing is, whereas you might all be children of the same father, you all each have your unique relationship with him. Some of you will run to your dad and jump on his laps, while others will just take a jump from the sitting room, and they all have their relationship with him. So what I would advise for you to do is come sincerely, come as a child. Don't come as a minister, don't come as a permanent secretary, don't come as an assistant. The protocols, you will get into those protocols with time, but start with the relationship. The relationship he has with you is he's coming to meet you in the cool of the evening, and he's looking for you. He's searching for you even more than you're searching for him. So I would say, come as you are, just climb into his lap, pull his beard, have your conversation. You will be the one who will instruct you, because that's how children come.
Thank you. Ruth, did you have a follow-up question?
Just thanking Enoch. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for that, Enoch. It seems there's a lot of unlearning and learning that needs to happen in the way we come to God, the way we approach him. But also one thing that I noted there was the bit of how everyone has a different relationship with their father, and it would a different way of expressing their relationship with their father. So if there's any other question, you can unmute yourself. We'll just take 2 minutes for that, and we will close. So if you have a question, you can unmute yourself, or if you have something and you want to type it, you can also put it in the chat. If you have any thanks, if you have any questions, all that can go to the chat.
Can people also send mobile money, or is it only questions and thanks?
The man of God.
He wants an offertory basket.
There is no virtual offertory basket. That's the problem. That's the
I would
problem.
just like to chip in one last thing on this child conversation. One of the things that set me down that path is I remember reading the story of David bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. And the oxen are stumbling and the ark is going to fall, and this gentleman reaches out his hand to climb the ark, and God strikes him dead. I remember reading that when I was much younger, thinking, but this is so unfair. What exactly did the guy do wrong? Like he was trying to make sure the ark doesn't fall. Why are you being so strict or so harsh on this person? And the truth of the matter is, as I was reading about most of these rules that were in place for the priests, the rules and regulations for the kings, for all of these people, and the law was there, the law was strong. And personally, Zenga and me as like this, I will not be able to manage all these rules. So I'm going to stay in my position as a child. I do not need the esteem that comes with being, all these titles and things. I am going to come as a child to my father and say, you know what, here I am. What's the plan for today? I don't need an office at this point. I want to be built in relationship. The difference even with who God said, oh, this is a man after my own heart. Same guy who's on, the rooftop staring at Bathsheba, the guy who's dancing and his clothes come off, the guy who's stealing people's wives, the guy who's doing all these things is still a man after God's own heart because he was coming into a place of relationship. Who you are and your identity and your knowledge of that ends up showing in all other aspects of your life more than what you do. You leader, power, singing all the best songs, but your character will leak and your insecurities will start leaking on that platform. And we'll be noticing that, yeah, there's something off. And you're not doing it for us, but you will start leaking unless you've stewarded this secret place, this relationship, this humility of being a child more than being a mighty man of God. And then everything else will flow out of it.
Enock, I just wanted to ask again, when you say a child, you know how we, for example, you go to God and you're talking about many things about your life. Now I'm just speaking as a child now. I say, Lord, career, maybe marriage, I don't know, business, whatever. But in your heart, of course, you have things you want to achieve, to do, you're aspiring or you aspired for them. Does that tell him? But I later say, Lord, that is my desire, but let your will be done, So is that also being a child, just being sincere with him, but also allowing his will? I know I have the things I like. I'll give an example. When I wanted to accomplish my master's program, I desired so much that I didn't do it from within. It's better there, this and this is there, the books are available, the lecturers don't delay, I'm able to do my research on time and things like that. But God opened a different door for me, and I see that it worked out his way for me. So that's why I'm saying, I'm asking as a child, yes, I have what I'm telling my father. Does that mean also that in telling him, I say, Father, you know better, so let your will be done in whatever I have aspired to. He already knows. So if it's mistakes, if it is what, he already knows before I even talk to him.
I were hosting children at camp here, about 200 of them on Sunday from the community. I was sitting down with some of them asking what they wanted to be. And the first kid told me what he wants to be when he grows up is he wants to be a dinosaur. That's a typical child conversation. And that one of my best friends in the whole course of camp. Was that a reasonable thing to want to be? No. Did it make sense? No. But he was being a child. And sometimes that's what we sound like to God. And for us to be content with that, rather than try to sound, I have this figured out, I'm in accordance with God's will and all of that. Yeah, maybe you are, maybe you're not. God still accepts you. There's the saying that when God put a calling on your life, he'd already factored in your, I think they said he'd already factored in your stupidity. Because the things we think we know, we only know, now we see in part, we prophesy in part, one day we shall know the full. We are all children before God. We are all ignorant before God. We are all like dust before God. It's just that some of us recognize it and others think more highly of ourselves, and we're like, no, I've figured out this God thing and I know exactly what I want. And so I'm going to prophesy and decree it, and you try to put God in a box. The other thing I would say is read the Psalms. Look at how David approaches God. And a lot of times when we come to God to pray, it's not to move God or to get him to do what we want. What usually happens most times is when we come to God in prayer, God changes us even more than he changes our circumstances, because he knows the circumstances. That the whole of this journey is about us. That's why if you look at that slide, the last thing there is Christ died for you, not for your ministry, not for your career, not for your all of these things. He died for you to have that relationship with him, for you to be adopted into his family, for you to be a son, for you to be a daughter. What it's all about. So yes, when you come to him, just be honest. If there's things you want, say them. He will correct them if they're right. And he will correct them if they are wrong. He will fulfill them if they are right. But the main point is you. We're talking at camp here and talking about how God puts the disciples on the boat and sends them out, and then a storm comes and he comes walking to the boat to save them as they thought they were drowning. That wasn't an intervention. God knew there was going to be a storm. Jesus knew there would be a storm, and he still put them on the boat and sent them out. The experience is what he was taking them through, that would understanding, into having more relationship with him, into being in a place of we are his children and he's in charge. Those Sunday school songs we used to sing, he's got the whole world in his hands. You've got your education, he has your career, he's in your future, he knows what's happening, he's been in your past, he has all of it under control. This is about you being in relationship with him.
All right. Thank you, Enoch. Thank you, everybody who has been able to ask a question. Thank you, Ruth. I hope the questions have been answered adequately. For those who haven't had a chance to ask a question, this is the last session. You'll have to meet Enoch in person. So, Enoch, I don't know if you'll mind having your number there in case some people want to come for the Biblical Manhood and Womanhood in person, or if you'd want us to direct them. But you could have your number on in case some people need to reach you for this training. Remember, like Enoch said, this is a training that can be had even much better on site, Musana camps. And yes, the number is right there in the chat if you need it. Book an appointment and you can have this session in a group. A group of you can plan and go over and have this session with Enoch physically. I'll ask Rebecca to give a vote of thanks and close us off in a word of prayer.
Thank you, Moses, for moderating today. You did really well. Thanks everybody for coming on and staying on.